coasts of the world continents are the areas where the land meets the sea. The terms coast, coastal area, and coastal zone are used to designate land areas that are associated with this interface between land and sea. Atlantic coastal zones. For clarity, we shall say that the coast is that land area which is affected by marine processes such as tides, winds, and waves. The shore is that region from just seaward of the lowest tide level to the limit of the wave's direct influence on the land. This limit can be marked by a cliff or an elevation of the land above which the sea waves cannot break. Here in Florida, this is generally represented by a barrier or foredune. The beach itself is an accumulation of sediment that occupies a portion of the shore. The beach is never static, but is a moving and dynamic system, because the sand is constantly being moved landward, seaward, or parallel to the shoreline by the waves and winds. Between the high tide mark and the upper limit of the shore, there may be dune areas or grass flats with material that has been left behind by the higher than normal wave action of storms. From Fernandina Beach by the St. Mary's River to the Alabama border on the Gulf Coast, Florida has been blessed with some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. There is a great variation among shorelines because they are caused by several different forces. Florida's beaches are products of sediments eroded from the Appalachians, carried across the coastal plain to the ocean by rivers, and then distributed southward by the littoral currents of the ocean itself. Along Florida's Atlantic and Gulf coasts, the beaches are composed of either sandy sediments from the interior or of calcite, which is calcium carbonate, The beach itself is a deposit of loose sand washed about by waves on the shore. It is almost free of all vegetation because the wave action prevents anything from growing. The zones of the beach are fairly definable. The zone where the sea meets the land is known as the littoral or intertidal zone. Above this, where splash, spray, and salt mist affect the land, is the supralittoral zone. Under extreme wind and storm conditions, salt spray is carried far inland, creating wider spread saline conditions. Terrestrial plants on the foredune area are limited to those species that are extremely salt tolerant and can withstand the hostile environment. Even the windward side of trees, farther back from the sea, show evidence of stunted growth and scars from salt damage. The shores or beaches in Florida can be divided into four very general headings: the sandy beach, the marshy shore, the mangrove swamp, and the rocky shore. Most of the northern beaches in both the Atlantic and the Gulf coasts are of the sandy type. The sandy beach is continuous except for short interruptions by inlets and by outcrops of coquina rock. Northern beaches of the east coast are in general wider than those of the southern portion of the peninsula and have much gentler slopes. As you move southward, the quartz sand slowly loses its dominance and is replaced by shell fragments with a corresponding increase in calcium carbonate and a change in color to a yellowish brown. Beach deposits are now more loosely packed than the hard silica sand of the north. The slow loss of dominance of quartz sand is due in part to the growing distance from the source of the sand and to the proliferation of shell debris generated by an environment more conducive to the growth of invertebrates. Just south of Matanzas Inlet, we find coquina outcrops along the intertidal and tidal zones. These huge deposits of coquina rock have become known as the rocks. This same rock formation can also be found inland along the intracoastal waterway and at a quarry west of Flagler Beach. South of these outcrops, the beach is composed of the more dominant shell fragments that give the beach a more yellow or yellow-brown appearance rather than the familiar whiteness of quartz sand. The beach is much steeper here and ascends to the outer dune ridge. Behind this ridge, the growth of vegetation is fairly well established, partially due to the shell component of the beach, which provides added nutrients to the otherwise sterile environment. Approaching the Daytona area, the silicous or quartz sands again assume their dominance. The beach's gradient flattens and its width increases. The material is hard, packed, and accommodates automobile travel. Few dunes are present in this area, even before the influx of people, which altered the coastal zone appearance. From below Daytona, south to the Dade County area, the shell again begins to increase while sand content decreases. The gradient or steepness of slope increases and the width of the beach area decreases. No matter what the composition of the structure, all of our coastal zones have some things in common. The zones of the beaches are somewhat the same, and the vegetation and animal life are very restricted by the hostile environment resulting from the sand and the saline waters. The beach is never the same from day to day. It is always changing in some fashion. It is becoming wider or narrower depending on the extent of the tidal changes. It is steeper or flatter depending on the magnitude of the tides and waves that break on the beach. It is either washed clean or it is covered by jetsam that has been deposited by the tidal washing. Old shipwrecks can be exposed one day and covered the next. Trees can be growing in the supralittoral zone one day and be washed away on the next. Beach sands can be totally removed by wind and waves of a severe storm, exposing an ancient marsh bottom that has been buried under the sands. one can sense the unstable nature of the beach. Such an area is a continuous shifting marine habitat. This is the intertidal zone, and its population of animal life is unique. Organisms that live here are alternately exposed and covered by the ocean's waters. Here in northeast Florida, the beaches are composed mainly of quartz sand with minimal shell debris. A heavy mineral component causes the beach to have a dark coloration, often mistaken for pollution. The appearance of these dark minerals suggests that the beach has been undergoing attack, and the quartz sand, which is less dense, has been carried away by the backwash of the waves, concentrating the heavy dark minerals to the extent that the beach takes on a much darker tint than normal. The swash, onflow, and the wash, the backflow of the waters, on the beaches result in a longshore current that flows parallel to the shoreline. The direction of the current's flow is determined by the angle with which the wave front approaches the land and varies with wind direction. It is very significant, for it is this current that is responsible for sand moving along the coastline as it is eroded in one place and redeposited somewhere else. Sand dunes that normally appear at the shoreline just above the high tide lines are known as the barrier dunes or the foredunes. Behind this first dune appear additional sets of dunes that have often been considered a wasteland or a recreational area for dune buggies. These are, however, fragile and very important habitats. The vegetation that grows here is sparse and unique, but evidence of life is everywhere. The sand that is carried offshore by heavy surf or winds is removed from the area by the longshore current and is eventually redeposited as the current slows. Upon reaching a bay or inlet, the inlet current outflow slows the longshore current and the sands are redeposited in a long spit or as shoals in the mouth of the inlet. Spits eventually extend themselves above the water surface and become a new feature of the beach. In some cases, eroded materials are carried seaward by the waves and currents to areas just off the coast, and bars are produced. When bars have grown sufficiently, they break the surface and become barrier islands. Much of the Atlantic and Gulf coasts of Florida are characterized by a barrier island system. These islands were once large offshore sandbars that became isolated as the sea level fell. The water behind these isolated sandbars or islands formed quiet lagoons, areas which serve as nurseries for all kinds of marine life that flourishes in the still, shallow waters that remain fairly warm all year. These structures, dunes, beaches, sandbars, and barrier islands, are not permanent. They are ephemeral in geological terms. Capes, sand islands, inlets, beaches are all drastically altered as the impact of the waves varies from one day to the next, from week to week, from season to season. The forces of nature are constantly at work reshaping and reforming our beaches. While we are constantly reminded of heavy beach erosion and the dangers of building too close to the shore, One must remember that we will always have beaches.